Falcone, director of the Museum of Contemporary Art, and along with my dear friend, Max Martinez, I am so delighted to welcome you all here tonight at the Holiday Theater, which is MCA Denver's home for music, performance, and events like this. I want to thank you for joining us for what we've called Beyond the Runway, a conversation with two creative visionaries in the fashion world, Vanessa Barboni Hallik and Karla Martínez de Salas. Tonight's event is brought to you by both MCA Denver and Max Clothing Stores, and I am so glad that you are here for what is going to be a captivating conversation, and I want to just take a brief moment to recognize the many sponsors and supporters who are here tonight and who have made this program as well as Friday night's program possible. Max and I are here to kick things off to introduce the founder and CEO of Another Tomorrow and the head of editorial content for Vogue Mexico and Vogue Latin America. This event, just like the MCA Max Mix, is a celebration of creativity, fashion, and joy. And I think we can all agree that we don't get enough of those things in our daily life. And it's all been brought to light by Max Martinez. As we all know, Max has been a pioneer, really maybe the solo pioneer in bringing cutting-edge fashion to Colorado. Not just to Denver, but all over. Max's influence in the fashion world has helped bring this event to fruition, and I owe such a huge debt of gratitude to you for your vision and your ideas. Beyond retail, Max is committed to building a better city for the young people of Denver, a commitment that he shared with me in 2019 after attending MCA Denver's gala. And Ellen Bress, wherever you are, thank you for inviting Max that year, because we wouldn't be here tonight if that hadn't happened. And since then, and even through a pandemic, we have worked together to create the MCA Max Mix Fashion Show, an annual event that raises necessary funds for thousands of young people served each year through MCA Denver's teen programs. Thank you for your commitment to teens here in Denver by being a part of this tonight.
Well, the exciting news, we hit $212,000 for the teen program. And I'm gonna make this really fast just because I wanna hear about Vanessa's career and Karla's career, but I want to thank all the beautiful women that I see in the front row that work for me. Without them, there would be no MCA. Every event is about them. So I have been waving at Karla Martínez for 20 years. And after spending 24 hours with her, I am so proud to call her my Latina sister. And I'd like to take a minute to thank you for what you do for the Latino women, the Latino community, women, gay, everything. You are a shining star, Karla, and keep shining for all the women that are here tonight and all the next generation of people that love fashion like we've been so grateful to have that in our lives. Thank you, Karla Martínez. Come on up. And Vanessa, I met 7 months ago, and within 1 second, we fell in love. Within 30 seconds, she said, I will come to Denver. And she's another incredible woman that I'm so lucky to have in my life. What you're doing for the planet to make a difference in sustainability, I can probably say in my career, I've never met anyone with that vision. Thank you, Vanessa, and I can't wait to hear all about what you're going to talk tonight.
So, it is now my great pleasure to introduce our two guests tonight. Karla Martínez de Salas is the head of editorial content for Vogue Mexico and Latin America. She began her career at Vogue in the US, becoming an associate fashion editor in 2002. She was the fashion director for T Magazine of the New York Times, and then served as fashion director at Interview Magazine before becoming the fashion and accessories director of W Magazine. In 2015, she moved to Mexico City and became editor-in-chief of Vogue Mexico and Vogue Latin America in 2016. She was included in the Business of Fashion's 500 International Fashion Leaders list and has led Vogue Mexico and Latin America to win awards for best editorial content. Thank you so much for being here tonight. Vanessa Barboni Hallik is the founder and CEO of Another Tomorrow, a B Corp certified end-to-end sustainable design company with a mission to model a new future for fashion with a fully digitized product ecosystem delivering technology-enabled transparency and authenticated e-commerce. She is also an investor in early-stage companies positioned to catalyze systemic change. The two of you are just slackers. I think we need to give you a new project. Vanessa serves on the advisory board for Harvard's Carr Center for Human Rights Policy, where current work focuses on the ethics of AI. She's an active speaker on innovation, digitization, and new business models built for resilience. Please join me in welcoming them here tonight. Okay, all right, so did you guys meet, and have you ever collaborated on anything yet?
I guess I'll start. So when I came into fashion, I knew one person, and that person was my college ex-boyfriend's sister in Paris, who had just had her third child and was not super available. But I was really amazed by how warm and welcoming the whole fashion community was. And one of the first people I met was a woman by the name of Stacey Caldwell, and she really opened up her universe to me. And so she brought Karla and I together now. It was about, 3 years ago,
Yeah,
I think?
3 years ago.
3 years ago. And Max really nailed it. I think Karla is truly the best of fashion, embodying warmth and openness and curiosity and obviously impeccable taste. And so it was a really organic conversation.
I remember going to your store on Bleecker and really hearing about the project Another Tomorrow and what a B Corp is and what a sustainable company means, being a sustainable company means in 2021. And Stacey is also from El Paso. We have a few El Pasoans here, including myself. And she's just so warm and such an amazing person. And I was so happy that she brought us together. And I loved listening to what you had to say. And I think Max can also say that, having worked in fashion, it's very refreshing to hear why you started Another Tomorrow, how important it is for other companies to follow suit, and exactly what we were talking about earlier. One company starts working and implementing sustainable practices and other companies follow along. So I think you were definitely a trailblazer and a leader before a lot of people were thinking about being sustainable or being a sustainable first brand.
Well, and it's really taken, I think, the curiosity from you and the warmth and from the industry to make it happen, because it was not a foregone conclusion that this would go anywhere. And that's the thing when you start a new venture, is you have no idea how it's going to be received. And so I don't take it lightly, the kind of friendship and support that we built and that I've had the experience of in the industry. So it's been really, really wonderful.
Well, Vanessa, I'm wondering if you could share, maybe to kind of anchor all of us around how you came to found Another Tomorrow, what some of those kind of formative experiences were, and maybe the somewhat circuitous path that brought you here.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this was a complete accident. As I already said, I literally knew one person in fashion. But I think the reality for every founder is that you bring kind of the sum total of your life experience to your work. You kind of can't help it. And so I'm originally an Iowa gal. So I was born in Grinnell, Iowa. My dad was a professor and an early technologist, and my mother was an artist. And it was part of the reason that I really feel this affinity for MCA Denver. But I grew up in this very multidisciplinary space with a very progressive, kind of positive worldview. And I really believed that the solutions to our problems would come at that intersection, and thinking in lateral ways, not thinking in linear ways. From there, I actually moved to Western Pennsylvania and really saw firsthand, this is like late 80s, what happened when capitalism went astray. So I saw, for example, in my town, a bunch of huge factories left, and the jobs that left absolutely cratered not just the economy, but really like the social fabric of that town. So between the time when I went to high school and my sister went to high school, they installed metal detectors. At the same time, it was an ongoing environmental catastrophe in the Great Lakes region. And so on the environmental side, I really saw that firsthand. So that kind of formative experience of interdisciplinary thinking, and there's a better way within capitalism to do things, were really formative experiences. So I originally took myself out of the Midwest to the West Coast in Berkeley. Thought I was going to be an architect. That seemed like a great way to mix those things on paper. And then I had, I've started to learn how to be more vulnerable about this. I had a real personal tragedy my freshman year of college. My mother committed suicide. And that whole kind of creative, beautiful part of my life, she actually ran an arts gallery when I was a teenager. It kind of shrank within me. And I did a hard pivot without even really realizing. I switched schools, I changed majors, and I ended up on Wall Street. And I spent 15 years actually on Wall Street at Morgan Stanley, which was an amazing way to learn about the world and all of the interconnectedness, which it really has been formative again for another tomorrow. But I was constantly trying to figure out, like, how do I make a really kind of future forward, future relevant perspective on my career, and I struggled. And so I left in 2007 to do a degree in energy and environmental policy. It clawed me back. I spent another 10 great years there building businesses, actually a big chunk of it in Latin America, based in Mexico City, between Mexico City and New York. And finally, I got up the courage after I made MD to say, okay, what's this next phase of my career really going to be about? And one word came to mind, which then was purpose. And I said, okay, if I really believe in what I say I believe in, I have to be willing to take some level of personal risk to make that a reality. And so I made a huge pitch within the bank to build out this whole ESG program, and they weren't quite ready for it, and now they're doing a pretty good job. And so I was going to leave, and they said, oh, we know you. You'll be back. Just take a sabbatical. And that was such a gift, because it gave me, for the first time in my life, really the opportunity, the permission to just be curious. So I took a 6-month sabbatical. I thought I was going to stay in finance and really work toward bringing capital toward new solutions for our future. And I really, aside from being a lover of fashion, it was one of the only personal areas of expression for me. I knew nothing about the impact on the planet. And when I learned, I was just completely taken aback. The more I peeled back the layers of the onion, the more I said, whoa, like, this is a problem worth solving. And it's a problem that needs a new blueprint for the future. And so, crazy enough, that was how Another Tomorrow came to life. Really to be a living, breathing case study for how we thought that the fashion industry could operate differently at the brand level. And that's what brought us here today.
Can you tell us about, there's about 800 questions that I could ask as follow-up. But I think just to kind of get us a little bit up to speed, what are some of the things that you discovered or came to know that you couldn't unknow that helped with this kind of whole new chapter in your life?
Yeah, I think there were kind of 3 main takeaways. So one, it never dawned on me that fashion is actually either an agricultural product or a petrochemical product, by and large. Now there's some stuff made in labs, which is pretty cool, but it's a tiny, tiny, tiny piece. And so the same way that we think about like farm to table, we can think about farm to closet. And it's the same kind of impacts on our ecosystems, on animals, on carbon emissions, you name it. And so the images that you're seeing actually in the background are actually from our supply chains. And so that was a really different way of thinking about like how our products are created. So that's one, and it's actually fairly complex by product, but that's really, really important, just as a thesis of like farm to table, farm to closet. The second was just, I was floored by the amount of waste. I mean, over 50% of clothing ends up in a landfill in the first year. Which is
first year?
In the first year. And then what does make it into our closets, we only wear about 20% of it within a year. So that's pretty nuts. And so just the sheer kind of overproduction problem was something I really wanted to solve for, and bringing circularity into it. And the third is, fashion is mired in opacity, but it is a very human business. It's a very female business. And the statistics are all over the place, but by and large, it's thought that about 90% of garment workers don't earn a living wage, and the vast majority of them are women. So considering that fashion is kind of one of our most personal sources of expression, it's kind of uniquely human, it's amazing that it very often does not match our values. And so I just think it's such a huge opportunity. It's really an imperative to change.
I think it's so true to think about being farm to closet. I mean, just when you were talking about visiting farms in New Mexico, and I think in this, even though we have so much information available at hand, I feel like in the fashion industry, somehow that message gets lost, right? It's just kind of, what else can we buy? What is someone promoting? And I feel like in that, we've lost sight of, what cotton is made out of, what, where it comes from, what happens, when you break it down, when you put chemicals in it, and what we're wearing. And I think that's so important. It's something that we really have to remind ourselves of, like when we purchase something.
I think it's so true, and that's, I think, what also creates that sense of value, is understanding that sense of provenance, and not just who's touched it, but what it's made out of and what the impact was. And I think it's a really strong message to consumers, and it's a really different way to think about what you're investing in, because it really makes a difference.
Absolutely.
To what extent do you, Another Tomorrow was founded in 2020, is that correct? So in the last 3.5 years, 4 years, to what extent are you seeing more people, more brands, more leaders kind of pausing and having this opportunity to reflect in the way that you have, because when you hear farm to closet, it is like such a different framework for thinking about how you spend your money, and obviously, leading with your values, et cetera. How have you found that reception in terms of this alternative framework?
Yeah, I think we're seeing a lot more interest, a lot more curiosity, and I think that's where it starts. I think it is really helpful to kind of have a few examples out there that make you question things. We're a B Corp, as was mentioned. We're really excited to see that Chloe now is also a B Corp shortly after us, so we were really excited to see that, and we hope there are many more. We're also seeing that there's a real tailwind out of Europe to regulation. And that's going to be what kind of forces the issue, I think. But brands need to know that the end customer does care and is curious. And so there's tremendous power even just in asking questions as consumers.
Karla, I would say that you have, similar to Vanessa, you have a really incredible arc of your career that has brought you to Denver tonight, and especially courtesy a longtime friend from El Paso, Stephanie Donner, who I want to acknowledge, for helping lure you here for this specific program. But you're, at the top of your game. You are among the leading, kind of most respected and inspiring sources of, who, I don't want to say decision maker, but certainly in terms of where you direct your attention and time, it sends such a powerful message. So if we can just learn about your journey to how you got to where you are today, for those who are just starting out or who may want to make a pivot themselves, what were the experiences that were super formative for you as well?
Well, thank you. I think for me, it's so interesting to hear Vanessa speak about her background, because you kind of changed industries completely, and I'm sure your finance industry helped you a great deal, and especially not make mistakes that a lot of designers and founders make, because you have the financial background, which I think is so important. And I think a lot of us that work in fashion probably should have been given that financial background, those financial tips that are so important, and that we don't get when you start working in editorial. But I think, important moments for me, I was telling Stephanie yesterday, I'm from El Paso, Texas, and a human resources woman asked me, very kind of in a condescending manner now that I think about it, how someone from El Paso, how a girl from El Paso would come to move to New York and work in fashion, and I later realized that she was asking me because most of the women that arrived in those jobs and that had those jobs were, someone probably from like an Ivy League school or the daughter of someone or the friend of someone that worked in the magazine. And, my dad was a surgeon in El Paso and had absolutely no connections to anyone in fashion. So, that I think was an important moment and something that kind of made me question how I got to where I got in. Yesterday, speaking to Max, we were talking about being Latin and Hispanic in the fashion industry. And I think one good thing, which I'm sure you've noticed, is that the community is, yes, it's a very hard industry, and I feel like there's certain things that are very kind of snobby and elitist about it, but it's also a world that really welcomes all sorts of creatives. And, Max was saying I was a young gay Latino boy and I was like a young Mexican girl, and it's kind of like a weird melting pot in a way. So I think that's something that was really amazing. And then in 2015, after having worked in editorial, unlike Vanessa, I've only worked in magazines, which for better or for worse has taught me a lot. Very different kind of magazines, and I think having worked in the US and then moved to Mexico, and everyone used to say, oh, you're moving back to Mexico. I'm like, actually, El Paso's not in Mexico. It's in the US. I never lived in Mexico, so I'm moving to Mexico, not back. But it was a real learning experience because I saw with foreign eyes. I've kind of spent my whole life in this in-between. I wasn't Mexican enough for my Mexican friends and family, but I wasn't American enough for my American friends and family, despite living in El Paso with 80, even Stephanie Donner speaks Spanish, everyone speaks Spanish there. And I think that really helped me when I moved to Mexico to see things with a different perspective. And I don't know how many of you have spent time in Mexico, but 10 years ago, if you saw the media landscape, if you saw, if you watched TV and series, pre-Netflix and Prime and streaming, what you would see was a lot of European Anglican beauty. And I think, as a young Mexican girl growing up there, I said, this can't be right. Why is my boss telling me that I should only have American and European models? She says that, certain women don't, Mexican women want to see, something that they aspire to. And so that got me thinking, and there was so much going on in the fashion industry in 2015 and a lot of models that I feel like weren't being covered. And so we started covering them, and we photographed Linnacy with her natural afro hair on the cover. And then, we did Camila Cabello, which is now that you think about it, it's why was it such a big deal? Yeah. And then we did Yalitza Aparicio, who was the first indigenous woman on the cover of Vogue worldwide. And I remember Mercedes, who works with Vanessa, her cousin said to me, American, third generation Mexican living in El Paso, living in Austin at the time, was like, thank you for putting someone like me who on the cover. And that kind of really stuck with me, because I said, if Audrey, my friend from growing up that's lived in New York and completely cosmopolitan and worldly, is saying this, then it's something that really important and that really changed those things. So changed the perception of what beauty and who could be involved in fashion. And I think that's a lot of what we see is who is allowed to be in the industry, right? So I think that was one of, if not the most, the third most important thing I learned is that there was space, and that Mexico and Latin America were ready to welcome a different group of people to the table and bring that in. And I feel like now that you see in fashion, even 20 years ago, maybe the brand would have been something else. But I feel like people are really excited for new ideas and to open a seat, right? And I feel like from not just company-wise, but also people and who was involved.
So do you feel like there was less resistance to the pretty bold moves that both of you have kind of shepherded? Less resistance now than maybe there would have been 20 years ago, 10 years ago? Or let's not discredit that there's still a lot of resistance, and it's not, it's certainly not simple.
I would say that 20 years ago, I guess when I started working in fashion and when I had that question asked, I think fashion didn't want to change. I remember being an assistant at Vogue and just the way it is. Not that I ever experienced any sort of, Max was asking me, did you ever experience any sort of racism? And no, I didn't. And I feel like the magazine was an amazing group of women that were a melting pot. But yeah, I was one of the few, or if not the only Mexican girl there. And I don't think fashion was so ready to change then. I don't know if you think, I guess if you think about other brands that started.
Yeah, it's funny. I don't have a great point of reference except as a consumer at that time. And I think that there was a lot of sameness in a sense that only one thing sold, and I think that a lot of fear of change is just that. It's driven by fear that, no one will show up. No one's going to see themselves in it, that there isn't this. And I think that it's these people who kind of break down the barriers like you have and see that actually it unleashes this sense of connection and belonging, that things do change. But, I don't have a great point of reference other than just seeing it from the outside. But from the outside, it was a lot of the same. And now I think it's much more open. I think at the moment, I feel there's sort of two things happening at the same time. On the one hand, there's really this recognition that the system has to change, and an openness and a curiosity, but it's also a weird time in the world. And so there is a little bit of that fear-based thinking of just yes, we know, but let's also just kind of keep doing what we know works. And so I think there's sort of two things happening at the same time, but a lot of the cracks have opened up in, I think, really positive ways and in ways that have welcomed a lot of new opinions and voices and perspectives, which is wonderful.
I think also, starting a company in 2020 when probably very challenging and, we're all sitting at home.
Why?
How are you going to sell a suit, to the average, probably like the t-shirt dress that we saw today. That was probably more along the lines of what people were wearing. But I do think that it did open, like COVID and then Black Lives Matter, I think it did open a lot of opportunity in a way for brands that were speaking about, okay, guys, this is going on the planet right now. And, I think it's important to realize that the current system isn't working. And then the funny thing was that everyone was like, oh, we're going to go back. We're going to stop showing in 5 different countries 5 different times a year. And then we're all back to,
Yes.
Japan, China, Korea. It's funny because fashion is funny in that way that, people are like, we're not going to do this anymore. Oh, yes, we are. It's like people change their minds, but I'm sure it must have been incredibly challenging for you to start your brand then. And
yeah, it was insane. We launched on January 28th of 2020, so it was 6 weeks before COVID, which was totally not a part of the business plan. Otherwise, I probably would not have started a business anchored on tailoring, as you mentioned.
I think what I did wear a lot from you was, I have the cream cashmere blanket.
Oh, the blanket.
That's
so
like
good.
heaven. Talk about what you need in a global pandemic. Like a good blanket.
A good blanket.
We should have made more of those.
Yes, exactly.
No, it was hard, and we really had to stay the course because it was all those like sweatpants brands that were blowing up, and so it took a minute to just say, okay, we really believe that it's a matter of time. We believe in what we're building. We believe in this brand identity, and we don't want to compromise that. We definitely should have made more blankets, but we didn't want to compromise the overall aesthetic. And so we had to slow things down a little bit. And coming out of finance, that was not something that I was comfortable with. Like the idea of being patient, taking things one step at a time, I think was actually a really good experience for me. But to your point also, it did give a moment of pause for people to just consider other ways. Even if we've reverted back, in some cases, doubled down on some of the things that I think we all talked about needing to change, it did open up this conversation that wasn't happening before and gave people space to kind of observe, because we all live in this super fast world.
Well, in kind of building off of that, referencing a moment in time where every industry was kind of brought to its knees and had to rethink how it did everything, certainly as a place-based organization, as a museum, we absolutely had and every industry had their own kind of reimagining, pivoting. I can't even use that word anymore. It's so nauseating to reflect on how many times we had to use the word pivot and flexible. That being said, what were some of the, you talked about like cracks in the system. What are some of those cracks that have continued and you're seeing really positive potential, if not already impact from, like things that have changed or evolved or shifted? Or
I would say one of the most positive shifts has been a cultural shift toward resale. This idea of buying secondhand, which I think is, it's so crucial. When the biggest kind of industry innovation was fast fashion, just how do you make things cheaper,
Right.
faster,
In
more.
2008? No, 7,
Really,
8?
around then, and that really took off. We have to swing the pendulum back to treating clothing as an asset. And I think when I look at just the cultural uptake of buying secondhand and this idea that is okay, and that's been huge. So that part of the market's growing like 10 times the pace of the regular market, which I think is really, really wonderful. And you have a whole next generation of fashion lovers who are like down for the hunt. They're down for the discovery. And so, that was something that we built into our business model, as you mentioned. But, by and large, I think that's been one of the really, really positive things. And the economics are behind it, which is one of the reasons why I think it works. Mm-hmm. It's one of the few ways you can make the more sustainable choice, and it actually also costs less, or generally costs less. So I think that's very inspiring for me, because it's a business model that works and that the industry at large can really adopt at scale. So I'm really, really excited about that.
And Vanessa, you have an option within Another Tomorrow where people can sell back their Another Tomorrow items, and you can acquire. So
yeah, so basically like everything has its own unique digital ID. So you scan the care content label and you can see, in some cases, the sheep, literally like for transparency, but then you use that also to say, okay, I want to resell this. You can see what it'll resell for, and it comes straight back to us. So we really stand behind that, which has been really wonderful.
Now, as an outsider to your industry, that feels pretty novel and new. Is that something that other businesses and brands are doing with their own?
They're starting to, which is super cool. We were very lucky because we were starting from a blank slate. So we actually could build a brand where literally every single item has that unique digital ID. That's a very difficult thing to do if you are a massive company with lots of products. But it's been a case study that, actually we took the inspiration from food, which was super interesting. But we're now really seeing that. So digital IDs are becoming much more known. Re-commerce is becoming much more known. So there's definitely a wave in that area, which is super exciting.
I think you even see it. Sorry, in I think even like H&M has a program,
totally.
Which is really important as well, just because of the price points. I think you can take things back and put it in a bin, and I don't know if you get credit or they recycle it or do something, but at least it's a giant step in these companies that have sort of been responsible for a lot of fast fashion and clothing. And I always like to say fast fashion I hate to kind of single companies out, because if you buy a $5,000 jacket that you never wear, that's, I think it's relative to everyone, because someone might buy something that's, $150 that's amazing and expensive for them at the time, and they might wear it 20 times. And I think it's the use, right?
Totally.
Like to really hang on to things that you love, no matter what they cost, right?
Yeah, I think it's wonderful to think about it as like, it's almost like price per wear, and I think one of the rules of thumb is like, could I wear this item 30 times? Really, and like thinking about that when you're making purchases, which is, it doesn't matter the price point, it's the same question.
I'm like being self-reflective for a moment. The fact that I giggled when you said, "Would I wear this 30 times?" I think is so symptomatic of some of the challenges that you're talking about. And there are T-shirts that I certainly have worn thousands of times, and I have are loved on and stuff, and they're like my most prized items in many ways because of what they signify. But I think there's so many kind of like habits and behaviors that you're talking about that are so entrenched. How are you approaching like partners and even thinking kind of beyond your specific line or business rather, to help kind of unstick us from these behaviors that we are kind of attached to, consciously or not?
I mean, I'm a huge believer in collaboration as opposed to competition, and I think it takes a lot of different voices telling the story in a lot of different ways that people can hear. And there are some amazing voices in this industry. I mean, one of the women who's become a really dear, dear friend is Mara Hoffman, and she's like the absolute real deal, and I think that she has a beautiful way of connecting with people and describing that. So I think it's, we all have to do it together. I think that the voices of influence in like the social media sphere are also really important because they can lend a credibility that sometimes isn't there for brands, and so you've got to really attack it from a bunch of different ways. Sometimes it's very academic, sometimes it's very emotional in terms of who made the clothes, sometimes it's about policy, so it's really a lot of different angles and a lot of different voices, but it requires a kind of sense of like collectivism that we really need.
And are you finding that people outside of the fashion industry are open to those types of collaborations?
Yeah, I mean, we kind of have this conversation happening that we talk about like food, clothing, and shelter, because there's a lot of commonality in the issues, and they're really central to all of our human needs. And so there's a lot of dialogue that's been happening between folks in food, folks in like the built environment, and architects, and thinking about how we can kind of create these threads between these industries in ways that people really understand. Because I think food actually came first. We put it in our bodies. We experience it firsthand, and then it was sort of like skincare. You put it on the body, but it's not quite as direct. And some of these other, industries where it doesn't impact your health in quite the same way, you sometimes have to build bridges to understanding where they exist in other industries. And I think we've found some interesting ways within our community to start to do that.
Amazing. Can you talk a little bit about how you have kind of embraced and utilized technology as kind of so core to pretty much every function that within your business, and also Karla, if you can maybe building on that, share how you're seeing technology being harnessed in positive ways in other parts of the fashion industry.
I mean, for us, the technology is really the building block of all of this. So this idea that we could have these digital ideas on everything kind of created this scaffolding, this architecture that we could build up everything. So when we first decided to do that, the first use case was this provenance use case, so that you could scan it and see where it came from. We also know not everybody's like super curious about that, but it was a proof point and like a trust point to know that that was there. But we always said that we were going to leverage that to enable this re-commerce. The cool thing that we did in between is we actually used it to create a size exchange program. So one of the things that we learned by listening to our customers is that bodies change, particularly women's bodies change. And so we leveraged that to give people an opportunity that if your size changed, you could bring it back to us. So you could just accept who you were in the moment, buy it without thinking about, was your body going to change in a month or however long? And then just iterate off of that. And then finally, we used it for our authenticated resale program. But really, that technology has enabled everything to happen so much faster and so much more seamlessly. I mean, now we're at whole new frontiers in terms of AI, and I'm sure that's like a whole other conversation that we could have, because there are many, many use cases for that, some really exciting, some a little bit problematic for fashion. But it's an industry that's been very devoid of talent in technology, I would say. And so there's just a huge amount of opportunity for that integration for good.
Between tech and fashion, no? I
Yeah,
feel like there
totally.
has been, I think now there seem more united. I mean, if you think about even 15 years ago, like Net-a-Porter was, unheard of, that people were shopping online. And I mean, we were talking about it today, Flora Jane and I, about how, people buy and return things, and that's horrible for like New York City traffic and the environment. And but now, I mean, hopefully, why would they? They can go to Max and try things on and get beautiful things. I feel like that's the one thing that, like, technologically I've been very resistant to, is like I love going into the stores, and I feel like there's really nothing like it. And I know that, for time reasons and convenience, people love, clicking, but I feel like there's such a special relationship between the women that you buy from, or men, that they know you, and you see kind of them reflected.
Totally.
I think that there's no technological tool that will ever replace that for me. Just in my aging myself, and the old fashioned, I feel like there's nothing more special than like going to a city and finding out where all the women shop. I feel like there's something really to say about that. And of course, this wonderful man, we need him to open in San Miguel too. But I do think that technology will help a lot. I think more in terms of, I hope it doesn't replace models or celebrities, and that, I think that's a very slippery slope. And I know at Condé Nast it's been really a fine line to see how AI is used. I think for translation it might work, but even, I was talking to our digital editor, and she said that, the Google algorithm is punishing texts that are translated with AI. So it detects them, and it brings your, SEO search, or it brings your search engine, like it knows. It's really smart. So, if we have a contributor that is like, oh, they're never going to notice, and their article is like here, and the rest of them are here. So I think it's going to be something that, as with a lot of industries that we kind of see, we have to navigate cautiously, right?
Yeah, I think definitely, and there are like huge human consequences, as you referenced. And I think one of the beautiful things in fashion is also what you said. It's like that. It is that human connection that is irreplaceable.
And I do think that probably for like a lot of designers, like technology is helping, and that you don't have to get on a plane to see this, and you have models now, and you can get sizing right without having to send someone. And I think a lot of that kind of back and forth and shipping, and that I feel like has changed. I mean, if you think about what COVID did, where you had to fly to a meeting, whereas now I think people are going back to flying into the meeting.
That's just because they want to get away from their family.
Exactly. Exactly. Like, I cannot do it over Zoom. It's impossible.
Well, I think what's so interesting is that it sounds like what you're saying, for so many years, the industry's embrace of technology was really around commerce. And now what you're looking at is the kind of the function almost. It's not about the transaction, but it's like, how can you both make a better product and actually with the technology, and then also how can you use it to actually bring you closer to your, whoever is buying, your clients or consumers who are buying the product. And in that sense, you're bridging a gap that historically has been like so wide. So it's, in a sense, it's kind of ironic that it's technology that is bringing you closer to the client, but that really is one of the really exciting benefits, it sounds like.
Yeah, totally.
So I want to kind of I can't believe I almost said that. Shift a nudge, because I want to acknowledge the fact that we are here in Denver. We're not in New York. We're not in, thank you, Max. We're not in New York or Paris. We are here in a market that is, and really a city at large that is, in a kind of continual period of growth creatively, economically, architecturally, in so many ways. And I'm curious, from, the two of you coming from these, much larger metropolises, and where your industry is based, certainly outside of, is more aligned on the coast, if you will. How do you think about kind of cities like Denver or Austin, or, I'm afraid, I'm not actually from Denver originally, and I'm always afraid that I'm going to step in it if I make a comparison that is not widely accepted, so I'll just stop at that. But how do you think of these kind of non-coastal epicenters?
I mean, I guess I'll take that first as a Midwestern gal. I think they're hugely important. And, again, I grew up with the arts. I grew up with my mother running this arts council. And I think that they're just incredible seats of creativity. I mean, New York is a bubble. It is such a bubble. I've been there for 21 years. I never thought I would stay that long, and I have for many good reasons.
Kind of like its own country.
It is like its own country. And you can start to think that this is the only thing that exists. And I think it's so important to get the heck out of there, and including get the heck out of Paris and other places. So I really, I'm such a huge believer, and I think that so much creativity happens in these regional centers, and in some respects there's more kind of cross-industry collaboration that's even possible, because some of the kind of megalithic kind of structures to industry in New York are kind of siloed. So I think it's absolutely wonderful and really, really important, because New York is certainly not all that there is, and there's so much. I actually wish I could say many more days here. I'm really excited to be here. But yeah, I'm a big believer.
I agree. I mean, I think, no offense to you, Nora, that grew up in New York, but I do, I think a lot of the things that I didn't like growing up in El Paso, now I really appreciate.
Yes.
And I think, I'm sure the Midwest is the same. It's far West Texas, not even really Texas, Houston people are like El Paso, they've never even been there. But I do think it helps you see the world through different eyes, and really not to take things for granted. But living in Mexico, I remember when we first moved there, my husband said, it's not going to be like New York. The industry, your fashion industry is going to be completely different, and it's going to feel very, small in comparison to New York. And so I always am so curious about going to other cities, and I feel like it's really great to see, everywhere in between, like New York and Los Angeles, because I feel like we have these references, but I've spent a little bit of time in Houston and Dallas, and I feel like Denver is kind of the capital of the Southwest area. I went to school in Tucson, which is also a small city, but I'm always so curious to see, as I was saying, the store, the way people interpret fashion in their lives. And I feel like Mexico is very similar to Denver. It's more casual than New York. I always say that, and I think you probably experienced it too, moving from New York to Mexico and also having kids. I'm wearing an all white outfit because my kids aren't around, because they're constantly pulling and tugging. But, I think that kind of changes the way that you're, I think we were talking about it last night, these cities, right? These kind of subway cities, commuter cities, where you go on the subway and you go 20 blocks and you're at your office, and they're very different than kind of the fashion show happens on the subway in a way. And when you're in a car, you just kind of want to be comfortable. And
100%.
You're probably in jeans and a blazer.
Yes.
And you're thinking differently. So I'm always very curious to see people's style.
Absolutely. And I think finding the kind of active pedestrian centers where people are walking and out and about. It's harder in in smaller cities where there isn't as much of a push to that. But I think in recent years, with just rethinking urban planning, kind of not so dissimilarly from how rethinking of so many other industries, it's about bringing people together, bringing it in, creating more density, and creating more opportunities, again, for the interaction and the connection.
I also want to add that before I came, I had only been to the airport in the past 3 years, which is a very good and effective airport, I must say. I was always like, why are there all these Mexican exhibits at the, museum? And I think it's really interesting because coming from Mexico, we were talking about this last night, a lot of Mexicans, as we know, come to Vail and Aspen and, a lot of the skiing towns. But, you guys have done shows with a lot of Mexican artists. You have a Colombian artist right now. And I find it so interesting because a lot of those Mexicans that are coming aren't stopping at the Denver, in Denver for the day to spend the day. And so I'm so interested. I even noticed at the museum that you have Spanish text, which most museums don't have Spanish text. It's, if you go to MoMA, and that's a question for you.
Well, here we are in, a historically Latino and Chicano neighborhood on the north side in a theater that was founded, and in a theater that was the first movie house to show Spanish language film, which just speaks to the import of this particular space within this community of being a cultural hub, and how I would say for MCA Denver, we're so committed to honoring that. And we do, and we have for a very long time been particularly connected with the creative community in Guadalajara. One of our board members is Eduardo Sarabia, who is from there, but before him, Gonzalo Lebrija was an artist from there who's also on our board for a period of time. And I think it was Gonzalo actually who identified this kind of synchronicity between Denver and Guadalajara, that we weren't, the biggest cities
like
within
Mexico
our countries.
City, like the
Exactly. But we were where really cool shit was happening. And I think that at our museum, at least, we really kind of, that resonated with us very powerfully. And of course, there's an amazing network of artists and artisans from that part of Mexico, and we've done a number of programs and exhibitions with them. And I think for us, it's about also just, if you're in Colorado, you obviously have a strong connection to Mexico historically over so many layers of time and history, and it's on us to continually acknowledge that. It's really easy to pretend like, or to not take the time to kind of peel back those layers. And I think by continually advancing the conversations and building those strong partnerships, it's something that Flora Jane is doing with the Biennial and so many other organizations are doing. It is a way of bringing that past, electrifying it, animating it, and bringing it into the present, which we care so much about. Okay, one more question, and then I'm going to try to wind it down so that we have time for audience questions. But Vanessa, I'm really curious about your Women for Tomorrow program, and I'm wondering if you can share a little bit about what inspired it and how it lives in the world.
Excuse me. So that was a COVID baby. I think there were several, but that was one for us. And, it was really challenging to build community in ways that we thought were meaningful during COVID. And so we wanted to do that in a way that we felt really had a lot of reciprocity to it. And so we were talking to these women in our midst, people that I had gotten to know, or friends of the brand, and they were trying to bring their own things to the world, and they were having a hard time doing it too. In particular, authors, actually. So I never thought about, what happens when there's no book tour. Apparently, that's a really big problem.
When there's no books?
No book tour.
Oh.
So you launch a book, but there's no book tour. So that was actually how it happened. So we kicked off with a wonderful woman, Paula Mendoza, who is the co-founder of the Women's March, an incredible filmmaker, and she had just written a young adult book. And lo and behold, the book tour was canceled. And so we said, okay, well, what if we profile her and all of the ways in which she inspires us and have a really raw, honest conversation. She also looks gorgeous in the clothes. She's incredible. And then buy her books and give our customers her books as part of their orders during this period of time. And so it was wonderful. And that was really how this series started. And so we found all of these women that we felt were making brave choices in their worlds to bring things to life. And so that was the idea of kind of Women for Tomorrow. And so it became this wonderful kind of content series. And so now we've thought a lot about, okay, also how do we become more gender inclusive? Like, how do we think a little bit more broadly? Even though women are very much at the center of our brand. And so we've actually just shifted the naming a little bit to Visionaries, but it's the same construct of really showcasing people's work, and making sure that we're using our platform to get the ideas and the passion and the heart out there that we really deeply believe in ways that are, mutually beneficial, which I think is what, community is about.
Absolutely. Well, it's super inspiring. Okay, maybe one last question before we open it up, which is, this is like such a kind of open-ended one, but both of you, from where you sit, you travel all over the world, you spend time at home with your families, you're kind of global, local, everything in between. What are the things that are lighting you up right now? What is inspiring you that are, maybe not as highly obvious, maybe the very obvious, but what is, my dad used to always say, you gotta love what you do because it's so hard to get out of bed in the morning. So what helps motivate you to get out of bed in the morning?
Oh, goodness. A lot. I have to say I'm a very optimistic, highly energetic, and motivated person.
She runs marathons on top of all of this, so that energy has to go somewhere.
Right now, when you said I was curious, or Vanessa said I was curious, I actually I would get in trouble for being curious. So I think right now when you were talking about books, I feel like I love reading. Part of why I love traveling is because I have, time to sit on an airplane. I try not to connect the Wi-Fi. It somehow never works for me, but I love reading and just the sense of discovery. I mean, I feel like this week I've been in Denver. I've never been here. I run outside. I realize there's cherry trees, not cherry, plum. The red plum tree outside. I think just seeing women and, men in here tonight and the fashion community all around, I think is something that always I love seeing. I love how people, have seen something in Vogue Mexico, have seen something that I've done or that you've done. And, when people say, oh, I follow you on Instagram, it's creepy that I know. And it's not. It's like, it's what it's meant for. And I feel like the fact that now we're all so connected by, in a very good way of how we all know what we're doing, I think is really interesting. And I am really inspired by people, by the way they dress, by what they're doing, what they're looking at. I really try and go to museums or see an exhibit wherever I go and I was blessed that Nora walked me through an exhibit and explains things, but sometimes, like when you go somewhere and you just see something from the outside, I love to see the way people kind of walk on the sidewalk and are in a museum and taking pictures and kind of living that. I think there's so much inspiration in it, and what I love most about my job is storytelling. And I think someone asked me yesterday, like, what inspires you as well? And I think meeting different women, and when I meet someone, I'm always thinking, oh, we should be doing this, we should be covering that. Why haven't we done this? And there's so many stories to be told, especially in fashion and certainly in Mexico and Latin America, that you kind of, something always goes off on these trips. And when I'm home too, I think it's kind of everywhere, but I think it's a very long and convoluted answer, but
beautiful.
That's it.
Yeah, I think, on my end, entrepreneurship kind of broke me open. Really it did. And, I came out of this career where I felt like I had to know all the answers in finance. And I was in many ways kind of like a closed, kind of know-it-all-y kind of a gal. And I think it sort of hardened me in a way. And in a weird sense, going through all the trials and tribulations of entrepreneurship, launching in COVID, 100 other things that have happened since then, it really gave me a kind of newfound permission to just actually be vulnerable. And I think what that's given to me is just an opportunity to build relationships on a level that I didn't before. I mean, even like Max, like we met like 7 months ago, as you said, and like my heart was open, you know, and in a way that it wasn't before. And I think I think that openness has allowed me to build connections and curiosity in ways that I don't think was like accessible. So I mirror a lot of, I think, what Karla said in terms of like what the beautiful work happening in the world. And I think what motivates me today is very human, and that sense of human connection and like the immense gratitude that I've had to, you know, our incredible supporters, like Max, people who really took risks on us, people who opened their arms, because it really takes a village, and thinking through like what are the ways to create that kind of reciprocity. So it's changed my anchor, and you find inspiration in a lot of places that I wasn't even awake to.
That's so beautiful.
Yes.
Well, I think it is time for me to stop asking the questions, and we are going to open it up to our wonderful audience. Just a few questions. I can't see. If you want to raise your hand high, Sarah is going to bring you a microphone. There's some in the middle here.
Hi, I wrote my question down so I don't mess it up, but I'm getting my master's in sustainable fashion, and my thesis is on sustainability reporting. So Vanessa, I was wondering if you see a future of like another tomorrow using some of the main like sustainability reporting frameworks like GRI.
I think you need to speak with, yeah.
Can you hear me better now?
Please.
Yeah, just
Yes.
one more time if you don't mind. 'Cause we
Yeah,
got
so I'm
slow
getting
down.
my master's in sustainable fashion, focusing on sustainability reporting. And I was wondering if you would see a future of another tomorrow using some of the more standard reporting frameworks to increase transparency, or do you like the way that you guys are going, which is not insulting in any way. I think it's a really wonderful way of doing it. I'm wondering if you see a possibility of shifting or anything.
Yeah, I think it actually really has to happen. One of the most challenging things about fashion and any supply chain is actually measurement. So just to speak a little bit about like frameworks for reporting, one of the things that you would need to report on are like carbon emissions, right? And so to do that, you have to be able to do like a life cycle analysis for a product. It turns out that's actually very difficult to do because you actually have to know at every single step of the processing, like what is the actual impact. So right now, the industry uses some very generic kind of baselines. Unfortunately, those generic baselines are not very accurate. So I think fundamentally there has to be that harmonization toward these like very accepted frameworks. But right now it's very difficult to get the data, so there needs to be a lot more investment in that. But I think it's a great question.
Yeah, that's kind of where most of my research has been pointing to, is it needs to go there, but there's a lot of roadblocks. So thank you.
Hi, my question. So I think what struck me about you both is that you have a true love of learning and are just so curious. And that has continued seemingly throughout your entire life. So what's something that you've learned recently that you would like to tell your younger self?
About ourselves?
Maybe about yourself, but maybe like a piece of advice or something like that.
You want to go?
Okay, I'll take it. You know, life is really about how you see it. I mean, there's no objective reality. It's all about your perspective. And I think that the lesson that I've taken is you can see patterns everywhere. You can see patterns of problems, or you can see patterns of resilience. And so I think that one of the things that I've taught myself is to look for the patterns of resilience. And that completely kind of shifts your mindset even toward challenges. It's not like, oh my gosh, the sky is falling. It's, oh, interesting. Like, how are we going to approach that? You know, so it's just a mindset shift that has been, I think, really important for me.
Awesome.
I think one of the things that I've learned, or at least about myself, in the past couple of, I would say, year, is just this, like, that you really kind of have to take a step back sometimes to see the bigger picture in terms of, you know, professionally and personally. I think that so much of our lives is kind of inundated with information, and we're all, I mean, working in media, it's like you really never get a day off because, you know, the Queen died on a Saturday, or, you know, this happened on a Sunday, and we're always kind of going. And sometimes it's okay not to be the first one to report it. It's okay to kind of process information, see which angle you're going to take, especially for us that we're not a gossip magazine. And, I think that a lot of the times, I think in terms of business too,
Totally.
it's really helpful to, kind of stop what you're doing and, really say, I need some time to process it. I think for any decision that you take, and I think before I was very kind of run, and impulsive in like the way that
And reactive.
in
probably.
reactive in the way that we were trying to communicate things, and I think it's kind of step back and
Slow down.
assess. I think a lot of the times we're very quick to react, and something that has taken me a long time to figure out is it's okay to stop and think, which a lot of decisions in the world aren't made like that. But
Well, thank
Maybe
you.
we'll do like 2 more questions.
Hi, obviously, Vanessa, you have this wonderful reselling program with all of your clothes and everything, but clothing obviously only has like a limited lifespan, and I know the question was a bit asked before, but I'm curious about how many times and how often you see those clothes come back, and if you guys are able to kind of monitor like the lifespans of those things, and even after, because clothes can't last forever. You were talking about how 50% goes into the landfill and everything, and obviously it's a really big problem, so I'm just curious about if you guys are kind of like monitoring that or like changing your processes, and kind of, because we've been seeing all these photos and everything, but I'm also kind of curious about the process of the clothes and everything that kind of goes into that.
We could talk for hours. No, I think that's a really great question. So I think the truth is, as a 4-year-old company, we are somewhat limited in terms of our data, but we really do produce clothing that we consider like asset quality clothing. So the idea is that we would measure their lifespans in like potentially decades as opposed to weeks, months, or years. So that's really the idea is, we want these garments to be out in the world for a long, long time. At the same time, at some point, they will reach the end of their useful life, hopefully in like 2100. But truly, it's going to happen. And so then it becomes about biodegradability and recyclability, ideally recyclability. And that's something where there's still a lot of work to be done. You would probably be hard-pressed to find your local municipal recycling textile facility. They do exist more and more, but it's a challenge. And equally, clothes have to be designed that way. So ideally, they want to be in monomaterials, which just means it's a single material. It's much easier to recycle. So it's a whole kind of design thesis for like how you design for disassembly. It's as true in fashion actually as it is for buildings. So there's a lot to be done. But the thing that we most focus on is really making sure that we can enable this really, really long life cycle.
Hi. My question, I guess, is mostly for Karla, but maybe both of you. So going back to something you talked about earlier on, which was during the pandemic, there was a kind of manifesto that was going around, which I feel like Vogue maybe spearheaded. I could be wrong on that. I might be remembering it incorrectly, but some kind of a manifesto about like decreasing the number of seasons that
About
everybody's
what?
doing.
Decreasing the number of seasons.
Oh, yeah, sorry, I have horrible hearing.
Okay, sorry, I can't tell how loud I am. Yeah, there was like a manifesto going around during the pandemic that I think Vogue was involved in that talked about decreasing seasons and trying to do things a little more, not just sustainably, but, less of a crazy schedule for everybody. And like you said, that kind of got abandoned, and I'm just curious if you see any of that possibly coming back, because it seemed like it was such a good plan.
About this, I think, I don't remember if Vogue spearheaded it, but, we are part of a global network that Anna Wintour is the kind of editorial director of, and, her idea was that, there would be a show in Scotland, and then there would be a show in Morocco. And I don't know if you followed last May, but it was, Mexico City. I think they went from Mexico City to Spain. It was like Asia, Mexico, then back to London, then back. And the proposal for Vogue was to say, okay, there shouldn't be one person from each Vogue flying all over the world, because it's obviously not good for the environment. It's, we can have one representative from Vogue in that country, or choose a handful of editors to represent, Vogue's worldwide. And I have to say, it's been met with a lot of resistance by the brands, because, each market is important. Each brand has market presence, and I think a lot of them want each editor to be there. And I think in terms of seasons, I think a lot of, if you think about the big houses, they have, 4 seasons for women, and I think that works for them. But what I always tell, especially young designers, and I'm sure you've talked to a lot of young designers, it's not a model that works for everyone. It should not be adopted by everyone. Just because, a contemporary brand on the floor sits next to you and they have 12 deliveries doesn't mean that every brand should have them. And I think one of the good things that came out of COVID is that some brands realize, I don't have to do a $500,000 show this season. I can present in a different way. I can, do a trunk show in Denver. I think what it did, I think maybe it didn't say, I think the proposal was to do like less seasons, less travel, and it's not something that works for everyone. But what I did think it opened up to was this idea that you can present your brand the way you want to present it. And if you don't want to have a show and spend millions of dollars on your bottom line, which is, I don't know how much, if you guys know how much a show is, but it's at least $300,000 that maybe you can put in investing in more sustainable practices. So I think what it did do was open the conversations for different brands that can't show 4 times in New York, Scotland, and Paris. That's just 3 shows out of 8 that they do. If that doesn't work for your brand, then there's another model that you can follow. And I feel like models were broken, and I think that was one of the good things that came out of it.
Thank you all so much for being here. Thank you. Thank you to Max Martinez for corralling these incredible guests tonight. Thank you, Vanessa and Karla, and thank you to the entire MCA Denver team for a wonderful program. Thank you all. Have a great rest of your evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.